We're starting a new book. Remember last week we finished Exodus. We're beginning Leviticus. And so the name of this portion is Vayikra, which is the way that we call the book of Leviticus in Hebrew. We don't call it Leviticus. Leviticus kind of is the idea that this is a manual for priests. That's kind of where that name comes from Levi, from the tribe of Levi and so forth. And on the one hand, yes, this is a book for, the how-to manual, so to speak, for the Levites. But ultimately, really, the book of Leviticus or Vayikra has to do with purity and holiness. And it seems kind of odd when you think about it. This purity, cleanliness, but you're talking about all this blood and gore and digestive tracts and fat and all this kind of stuff, tearing animals apart. It doesn't seem to match up, but really it is. It is about holiness, and it is the foundation and the foreshadowing, but the foundation for Yeshua's atonement, and why, as believers, we would accept Yeshua's atonement. Why it would be effective for establishing a holy and a righteous connection with God. So it's very important in that sense. And the word Vayikra, you really find it only two places in the book, right at the beginning here in verse 1, and then another place in chapter 10, but not really used in the same way. So it's kind of interesting, this idea. It's very unique. It's not unique in the Bible. You see Vayikra, that word used a lot, God calling, or the idea of calling. But what you do see over and over again, if you were just to sort of flip through Leviticus, looking at kind of the beginning of each paragraph and more often at the beginning of chapters, what you see over and over again is the refrain in Hebrew, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor. And God spoke to Moses saying, and it's kind of funny sometimes when we're looking for a spot in the Torah, we'll say, where does it start? Well, it starts with Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor. Okay, there's like 900 of those not really, but in the book of Leviticus, it's over and over and over. And in your Bibles, you're going to have the same, whatever your translation is, it's going to be something along the line of, and the Lord spoke, not called, but the Lord spoke to Moses, saying this and this, and then he said this, and then he said this. And you're hard-pressed, really, to find other places in the Bible that contain more of, this very direct words of God than here in Leviticus. And with that in mind, it's, with God as the direct speaker, is Leviticus really a dusty old book of regulations that should be passed over? I mean, God said this, God said that, and God said that over and over and over again. If you want to know what God said, I think you need to read the book of Leviticus. Sure, he's talking to Moses, but he's talking to you as well. So, without a good familiarity with the book of Leviticus, several things can happen. The New Testament idea of holiness can really, or does, lose its foundation. Books like Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. You want to read Hebrews? Well, some would say, and I even read some authors that said, if you don't know Leviticus, the book of Hebrews is basically closed to you. You're not really going to follow what's going on in the book of Hebrews. You think you might, but you're really not going to fully understand without understanding Leviticus. And Leviticus also really underscores and illuminates the picture of the costliness and the severity of atonement and what that was all about. Animals were very valuable. You see animals. Really, we could go through all the different. The piece, this offering, that offering, the different offerings, the intentional sins, the unintentional sins, and you can pick those apart, and we can do all that. But I kind of want to take more of an upward look today. Because really, there's pictures there, and one is costliness and severity of atonement. Animals were valuable. Meat was a high-value commodity. You didn't just go to the section over at King Soopers or wherever you go. And here, they're burning a lot of this stuff, burning it up. The priests are getting some, but things are getting burnt up. And good news for some of us health-conscious folks, the fat is never to be eaten. In chapter 3, if you read that, so that's biblical. But this is a valuable thing that we see over and over, just being burnt up and so forth and on the altar. And the regulations really aren't so much about how Israel earns their salvation. This is a redeemed people already. Remember, they were taken out of Egypt here. God had redeemed them. This is not about them earning their salvation by doing these things. It's about how they were to maintain their relationship with God. And the fact that God wanted that fellowship. Hence the detailed instructions. So it's not just busy work, do this, do that, so that you can earn your relationship with God. No, it's about maintaining and having a relationship with God. It wasn't just busy work. And quite frankly, would it be so bad to have God speaking to you so directly, instructing you how to have fellowship? When you read it in Hebrew here at the beginning, it's, God called to Moses. 3 times you got the word about he talked to him. I want to read here in the Torah portion, God called to Moses and he spoke to him saying. How many of y'all want that? He's like God to call to you and speak to you saying. So it wouldn't be so bad. So don't skip over Leviticus, God's description of the sacrifices that people needed to bring him were also the ones without blemishes, unmarked, perfect in a sense. So the application here, one of the applications certainly is for us not to scrimp in what we give to God, but to give him everything, give him the best of what we have. And ultimately, again, Yeshua does exemplify this effort towards perfection in his sacrifice. But it's not just about animal sacrifice here in Vayikra, in the beginning at least. It's a hard attitude, because think about it. You really, if you just, I just got to kill an animal. How many of y'all could just kill an animal cold-heartedly? Maybe there's some of us in here, some hunter types or something. But I think anybody that, I remember I hit one with my car one time. I still think about it. That was probably 25 years ago. it was a horrible feeling, seeing the animal's face and all this kind of stuff. And it was, because it was at nighttime and the lights were in the poor deer's eyes and so forth. And it was impactful, So you'd be pretty heartless if it was just a matter of, okay, I'm just sacrificing an animal. There is a heart connection here. In verses 1 through 4 is what I chose to read. And again, a very direct call to Moses. And a couple of things I want to point out from these 4 verses, which you have in your bulletin there on the blue sheet in English and in Hebrew. One thing is things are done at the entrance to the tent. I sort of saw that as a public statement, a public presence. It's not like you bring your stuff around to the back loading dock and drop it off there where no one's going to see you and it's kind of messy back. No, it was at the front. It was at the entrance. You had to do things at the entrance. It wasn't some anonymous drop-off of what you were, of taking care of whatever you did or whatever. There's also an incredible vividness in how the sacrifice was to be offered. Very vivid, and there's also that personal connection. I'm going to read here in these first 4 verses about lay your hand on the head. You can't kind of ignore what's going on there when you got your hand on the head of the animal that's getting ready to die in your stead. You feel the animal, you smell the animal, and like I did with the deer on that night back in the country, you look in that animal's eyes, most likely, and then it says you have to kill it yourself. Imagine that. Imagine killing a goat or a sheep, let alone a bull. It talks about killing bulls. I don't know if this is a baby bull or a bull. You ever seen a bull before? They're not small things. Imagine that. And then you have to skin the animal. Cut it into pieces. And they all get arranged on the altar. You don't just kind of throw it in a heap. It's got to get arranged in a particular way. One of those pieces that gets arranged is that head. That one that you just looked into the eyes of and had to cut off. This is in place of you. This is the image. And I think, often when if you hear about Leviticus perhaps, or some of these, again, these dusty regulations, as it says, I think, in your Torah tidbits today, this is what people often are so thankful for. Oh, so thankful for we don't have to do animal sacrifices anymore. So thankful Yeshua did it all once and for all as the sacrifice. And yes, of course, Yeshua was and is the ultimate sacrifice, the one that took the place, and why we don't regularly sacrifice animals. At least that's our view in here, or why we don't. But I want to suggest that maybe we might be missing out. I'm not advocating that we go back and do that, but I'm saying that let's not think that you're not missing out on something by having to go through that whole process. So on the one hand, yes, we're free, we're saved from all this stuff. Is that a good thing? To miss having to do all of these things and to be personally and intimately involved with sin and what we have to do now to deal with sin? Might we even be more cognizant of our sin and how we unintentionally fall short if we had to go through this process of sacrificing animals and giving away other things of value every time that happens, the best of what we have, just in order to redeem ourselves from what we truly deserve? So let's remember, though, that what has not been done away with, so to speak, is our need for obedience to God and seeking His presence and seeking His involvement and seeking His guidance in very deliberate, detailed, and specific ways in our lives.